America's enemy just fired at a real ship. No explosives, no rocket motor, just electricity ripping steel down a barrel so fast the impact itself does the killing. The US poured in hundreds of millions into this weapon, chased that dream for years, then shut it down. Japan didn't. Japan kept going, bolted the gun to a ship, and punched clean holes through a moving target. So who really won that bet? Modern naval war isn't just steel hulls and long-range missiles anymore. It's power. A ship now has to watch sky and sea at the same time. Cheap drones, cruise missiles, maybe hypersonic weapons coming in salvos, not singles. You can't keep firing million-dollar interceptors at $20,000 threats and pretend that's sustainable. You need something fast, repeatable, and affordable. That's the hole the railgun was supposed to fill. Strip away the sci-fi and the physics are simple and brutal. Forget gunpowder. Inside the launcher are two long metal rails, a sliding contact, and a solid metal slug. You dump a massive electrical pulse into the system. Current races up one rail, across the contact, and back down the other. That loop creates a huge electromagnetic shove that hurls the projectile down the barrel at insane speed. No flash of burning propellant, no explosive in the nose, just electricity turned into pure velocity. At several times the speed of sound, the impact alone is the weapon. Hit steel at that speed and it doesn't bend, it opens. The United States went after this first, and it went big. In the 1980s, Army labs started chewing on the ugly parts: plasma, heat, rail erosion, and how to push absurd amounts of current without destroying the gun. By the 1990s, test rigs were already flinging hypervelocity darts with megajoule-class energy, serious armor-killing punch. Then, the Navy grabbed the baton. At Dahlgren and other ranges, engineers rolled out an 8 megajoule demonstrator firing multi-kilogram projectiles. After that came the headline act, a 32 megajoule prototype built to push rounds to roughly Mach 7 and hit targets far beyond standard naval gun ranges on the order of 100 nautical miles or more. On PowerPoint, it looked like the future wrapped in one turret. The vision was clean and seductive. Lasers would burn down anything that wandered in too close. Railguns would own the mid-zone, swatting drones, aircraft, and inbound missiles long before they reached the fleet. Cruise missiles and other standoff weapons would hammer targets deep ashore. The new Zumwalt-class destroyers with their huge electric plants were supposed to be the poster children. One hypersonic slug costing tens of thousands instead of the millions you pay for a top-end missile, doing the work of a small storm of conventional shells. Then, the physics sent the bill. If you want to fire heavy projectiles at hypersonic speed not once, but hundreds of times, you need a massive reserve of clean power. Most surface ships just didn't have that headroom. Even on a Zumwalt, feeding the railgun meant taking power away from propulsion or sensors. And the launcher wasn't a noble, timeless cannon. It was a consumable. Every shot shaved metal off the rails. Every blast dumped brutal heat into the barrel. Critical parts wore down faster than anyone wanted to admit. In a lab with technicians and downtime, you can baby that. At sea, in salt air, with normal crews and real deployments, you can't. Then came the integration wall. Lighting off a railgun on a static test stand is one thing. Squeezing the launcher, capacitor banks, cooling loops, cabling and controls into a hull that's already packed to the bulkheads, and then telling sailors, "Relax, it's just another gun," is something else entirely. By around 2020, the Navy had dropped roughly $500 million on the program. The test videos were spectacular. The slide decks were impressive. But the weapon still wasn't something you could bolt onto a destroyer, send on cruise, and trust. It couldn't hit the required rate of fire, barrel life was poor, and the power and space it demanded didn't line up with what frontline ships could realistically give up. Meanwhile, the competition for budget wasn't standing still. Hypersonic missiles were becoming real hardware. High-energy lasers were finally burning real holes in real targets. When the 2022 budget landed with zero funding for the railgun, the message was blunt. The big electric gun was going on the shelf. Japan watched that story play out and chose a different path. Instead of chasing a 32 megajoule monster, Japan's Acquisition Technology and Logistics Agency, ATLA, went small and methodical in the mid-2000s. No giant, world's biggest gun turret, no hype charts. Just 16 to 40 millimeter barrels on land-based test stands, and one hard question. Can we push projectiles to hypersonic speed over and over without the gun eating itself alive? By 2018, they had an answer worth worrying about. ATLA built a 40 millimeter railgun that fired light steel projectiles at about 5 megajoules of muzzle energy. The support gear lived in standard shipping containers. One is the charger, several stuffed with capacitors. So from the outside, it looked like a pop-up lab, not a superweapon. But when they pulled the trigger, the numbers mattered. They drove muzzle velocities past 2,000 meters per second, around Mach 6, and kept firing past the 100-round mark. Earlier railguns, including American designs, were famous for chewing themselves up near the breech after relatively few shots. Japan leaned into tougher materials, better cooling, and refined geometry so the launcher stayed healthy. The payoff was a string of roughly 120 high-velocity shots with critical surfaces still in good shape. No viral fireball, no dramatic explosion, just the quiet moment when a crazy idea crosses into, this might actually be fieldable. Once it worked on land, the next step was obvious. Take it to sea and see if it survives the real ocean. Enter JS Asuka, a 1990s-era test ship with the bones of a frontline destroyer and extra space for weird experiments. Engineers bolted the railgun onto the wide aft deck and ringed it with those same containerized power modules. From shore, it looked like someone had parked a sci-fi cannon on a plain gray hull. In reality, it was something far more important. A working railgun riding on a warship-sized platform, ready for waves, wind, and salt. In 2023, ATLA crossed a line no other Navy had publicly crossed. They fired that railgun at sea. The first objective wasn't accuracy. It was survival. Would the mount twist under recoil? Would the power system trip when the ship rolled? Would spray, vibration, and motion do what no lab test ever could? Shot after shot, around 5 megajoules each, 40 millimeter darts left the barrel at roughly 2.3 kilometers per second, about Mach 6.5. The deck structure stayed solid. The turret held its alignment. The containerized power system kept cycling. The rails didn't tear themselves apart. The railgun had proved it wasn't allergic to the ocean. Then, Japan did the thing that makes every other defense planner sit up. It stopped shooting water and started shooting steel. In follow-on trials, Asuka's railgun went after a small tug-like ship being towed as a moving target. No more static hulks. No perfect angles. The target was out there in real sea conditions, bobbing and drifting the way a ship does in a fight. To hit that with a hypersonic dart, you have to stack motion on motion. Your ship is moving. The target is moving. The projectile is moving so fast that tiny errors at the muzzle turn into big misses at range. All of that has to line up in the instant. A massive electromagnetic pulse rips the slug down the barrel. And get that right, and you're not doing a science demo anymore. You're proving a weapon. So Japan turned Asuka's stern into a floating lab. A camera under the barrel let crews aim and fire from a protected control room. High-speed imaging froze the instant each dart left the rails. Compact radar measured muzzle velocity the moment the projectile cleared the barrel. Drones watched from above, tracking shot paths. High-angle shots were logged to map how quickly the projectile bled speed over distance. The question wasn't just, did we hit? It was, how does every millisecond of this shot behave from launch to impact? When engineers boarded the target vessel, the steel answered for them. Several clean entry holes, each a sharp cross where fin-stabilized darts had punched through. No wild gouges, no clear signs of tumbling. The projectiles had stayed nose forward, stable, and lethal. For a railgun, that's the whole game. Stable flight means long reach, predictable trajectories, and shots you can trust against real moving ships in real ocean air without a single gram of explosive. The hardware doing that damage is smaller than you'd think. The Oscar prototype weighs around 8 tons with a barrel roughly 6 meters long. It throws 40mm projectiles of about 320 grams on a 5 megajoule pulse. In ideal high-angle ballistic conditions, that muzzle velocity could send a slug several hundred kilometers downrange. In realistic naval use, with drag and practical firing arcs, Japanese figures and open-source analysis point to roughly 200 kilometers, about 110 nautical miles, of useful reach from a gun powered by shipboard generators and solid metal rounds. No rocket motors, no missile tubes, just electricity and steel. And Tokyo treats that not as a finish line, but as the start. ATLA's roadmap aims at much higher energy launchers into the tens of megajoules class, while moving from carefully timed singles into controlled bursts and real, sustained fire. In an actual missile raid, you don't get to fire once and admire the footage. You keep shooting until the sky is clean or the magazines are empty. That means cracking 2 nasty problems at once, getting rid of heat from repeated high-energy shots and shrinking all that power hardware so it fits inside future warships without eating the ship from the inside out. Why push this far? Look at the map. To the west, China fields ballistic and hypersonic systems like the DF-17, built to hit ships and bases from long range at high speed. To the north, North Korea keeps rolling out new ballistic missiles of its own. Both talk openly about salvos, overwhelming defenses with volume. Systems like Patriot and SM-6 can knock those threats down, but each interceptor costs millions and comes from a limited stockpile. In a long war, you're not just trading shots with the enemy. You're bleeding your own budget and magazines. A railgun attacks that equation at the root. Instead of throwing a guided missile with a seeker and warhead, you accelerate a solid tungsten or steel slug with electricity. The price per shot drops dramatically. Your magazine isn't racks of rocket motors, it's pallets of metal and the capacity of your generators. As long as you have slugs and fuel, you can keep fighting. Japan doesn't pretend the railgun is a magic wand. It's another ring and a wider shield. Missiles still handle the longest range, highest value targets. Lasers and close-in guns guard the last miles. The railgun sits between them, firing hypersonic darts at incoming missiles, swatting drones and cruise missiles, and still able to reach out and hit ships or land targets when needed. ATLA has already floated concepts for sea-based guns, coastal batteries, and truck-mounted systems for shore defense and counter-battery fire. The same slug that rips a missile apart in mid-air can punch into a warship's hull or wreck an artillery site on land. One family of rounds, multiple jobs. While Japan turns test data into hardware, the US hasn't completely left the field. It's just changing how it wants to play. After the big ship gun effort stalled, industry kept tinkering. General Atomics electromagnetic systems stepped back in with a different pitch. Not one gigantic turret welded into a destroyer, but modular railgun-based batteries for terminal air and missile defense. The vision is simple. Multi-megajoule launchers firing Mach-class tungsten projectiles, sometimes designed to break into clouds of metal, plugged into existing air defense networks. Smaller guns for drones and light targets, heavier launchers for serious missiles. All of it packed into container-like modules you can crane into place at key bases and island outposts. The goal is the same as Japan's at sea: kill mass raids without going broke on every intercept. The sales line is bold. The problems that sank the Navy's earlier railgun, railwear, repeat fire reliability, messy power control are now manageable with better materials and smarter electronics. The real test will be ugly and simple. Can those systems survive years of government trials, thousands of live shots, bad weather, and normal soldiers instead of lab engineers? Until they do, they're not a shield. They're a pitch. Japan, meanwhile, is building alliances around something it has already fired. ATLA has tapped American railgun veterans, signed with the Franco-German Research Institute to push electromagnetic weapons together, and watched as China rolls out a test ship with a big gun-shaped turret on the bow. Russia talks about EM launchers. Turkey and South Korea show prototypes. But so far, only one country has fired a railgun from a ship at sea and then walked people up to a real hull with real holes in it. That puts Tokyo in a different category. Now comes the hard part, getting off the test ship and onto real combatants. Japan isn't trying to leap straight to some ship-breaking megagun. It already has a 5 megajoule system that works at sea. The plan is to install evolved versions on future 13DDX destroyers, and possibly on some Maya-class Aegis ships if their designs can handle the draw. That means designing hulls and electrical systems around the gun from day one so it can fire without dimming the rest of the ship. Once you start doing that, you're not running an experiment. You're building for war. So what's the real story? The United States kicked off the modern railgun race, built massive demonstrators, and stepped back when physics, power, and integration all came due at once. Japan showed up later, picked a smaller energy class, solved barrel life and power packaging first, and now has a ship-mounted gun that has already punched through a moving target. If you're sitting in another Navy's planning room, you have to ask a brutal question. Did we walk away because the tech was impossible, or because we tried to sprint when we should have walked? Now, line that up against the threats everyone keeps worrying about. Hypersonic missiles, drone swarms, mass salvos. In that world, what feels safer long-term? A stack of ultra-expensive interceptors that disappear one launch at a time, or a deep electric magazine that throws steel as fast as you can charge it? Maybe the US comes back with railgun batteries around places like Guam. Maybe it links up with Japan at sea. Maybe it doubles down on lasers and classic missiles instead. But one thing is already clear. The railgun didn't die when Washington stopped writing checks. Japan dragged it out of the lab, bolted it to a ship, and proved it can punch clean holes in a moving hull using nothing but metal and electricity. The rest of the world is watching that footage very closely and doing the most dangerous thing you can do in defense planning. They're imagining what comes next. If breakdowns like this help you see past the headlines and into the hardware that might shape the next war, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive.